right, welcome everybody to episode 4 of The Stuff You Need For, the podcast where we discuss all the items you might need to start a new activity. And today we're talking a topic I've always been interested in, but I don't have any experience with myself. So I've got my 3 guests today. Robin Chin Roemer is an academic librarian and co-author of the book Meaningful Metrics.
Hi, good to be here.
Yeah, do you want to present your book to the audience?
I can.
All
It's
right.
very colorful.
Yeah, so I take that is an academic book for academic librarians.
It is.
All right, and with Robin is Ryan, Ryan Roemer is the author of Backbone.js Testing, and he's a co-founder of Formidable Labs, which is a software consultancy here in Seattle.
Hello. And there's the book, and it's although not as colorful as Robin's, it actually has a photo that Robin did take on the cover.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and in case you were paying attention, they are married to each other. So that's
For now.
changing the last name. And then lastly, we've got Adam Nathan, who I've worked with a long time ago. He's a software developer, and he's the author of many, many books covering Microsoft technologies, programming. And this is his latest one, or second to latest.
One of the most recent ones.
Yes.
Yes, it's good to be here. Thank you.
So it's Windows 8.1 apps with XAML and C#.
Unleashed.
Unleashed.
Very
Yeah, so you've got a lot of Unleashed.
The important part there.
Yeah, cool. So like I said, I've asked you here because you're all authors, which is awesome. And I'd like to just sort of discuss what it's like writing a book. And I guess we won't be just like talking about like things so much as there's probably a lot that's involved in doing it and even getting started. So I've got a set of questions, and maybe you guys can kind of guide the discussion more once we get going. But feel free to jump in whenever, and otherwise I'll try to direct questions if it seems like that's not working out. So I guess the first question I have for all of you would be kind of what led you guys to actually writing a book? I know lots of people think about writing a book or always talk about writing a book, but what sort of, it's a lot of work, right? So what sort of induced you guys into doing it? Was it like fame, money,
Totally.
career? Does it help your career? Or I don't know. You tell me.
Oh, well, since you're all looking at me. Yeah, I mean, when I wrote my first one, it was about 15 years ago when I started. And I just started out at Microsoft, and the technology we were working on was something that we knew we wanted a lot of books about. And the publisher came to our team, seeing if people were interested. And
was the publisher like they knew they wanted a book on this technology, and they were just like,
yes, they knew they wanted several books. And
Okay.
so my topic, which was on interoperability with the .NET framework, that was the product. That was the area that I was working on. And so one of the people on the team just asked me if I was interested, and I thought about it. I mean, I always kind of enjoyed writing in college, and just essays and things like that. So I felt it was something I could do. And I think my main motivation was I just wanted there to be a good book on the topic, something that had the insider perspective and was exhaustive. And I think in terms of any benefits to me, I figured that it would be helpful for my career, not so much a money thing. For sure, but
did anybody like upfront tell you it wasn't going to be a money thing, or?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, it was just after I went through it that I realized that if you want extra money, you should just get a second job, a minimum wage job on the weekend or something, because for the time you put into it, you shouldn't be doing it for the money.
Right. Yeah. What about you, Robin? You just wrote this book,
yeah,
right?
I did mine instead of 15 years ago, mine was 15 minutes ago. I feel like that mine, I started writing it a while ago, but it just came out very recently. Mine's a little different. I mean, I'm an academic librarian, and when you work for higher education, then writing a book is kind of something you'll probably do for your career rather than for the sheer love of it. If your poetry career isn't really going to motivate you in this sense to write this type of book. And so there were a couple things that kind of that coalesced to get to the point where I felt like, okay, this is something that I want to do. And in my case too, because mine is a co-authored book, a lot of it had to do with the people I was around and people I was working with. So I've been working on this topic, which is research impact, for a little while, as part of my sort of primary responsibilities as a librarian. I work with researchers, and they had questions about how do I measure my impact. So it was something I was very interested in. And then as part of my career, I did some, work with other librarians, whether it was doing workshops. I wrote some short articles, which is much more typical for librarians to do that type of output for their publishing record. And then that kind of just worked out. It was a topic that everybody seemed to want to know about and no one had written about. And that's one of those things that once you fall into that gap, you realize that, sort of like what Adam said, you want someone to write something that you could read on this topic. So my co-author, who was my colleague at the time, basically said, hey, we should write a book about this topic. And I think I said some things that aren't worth putting into a recording that, were amounted to, that's crazy. That would never work. And lo and behold, it sort of just turned out, well, what if we just wrote a really brief proposal and sent it off to the major publisher? I wonder if that's how you write a book. And it turns out that is how you write a book. And they said, that's so interesting. And it kind of grew from there. So it kind of planted a seed, but it wasn't something I ever thought I would do per se. I thought I'd always stick to shorter article level writing, or even like blogs, but it was an opportunity. It was hard to say no, especially once you'd signed a contract saying you would do it.
So is it not? So I take it like as an academic librarian, you probably have to do things like tenure and get approved. Is it common to be writing a book to do that, or like you're saying, most people just kind of stick to shorter journal articles or blog posts?
It's much more common to do things like scholarly articles, which are in the maybe 20-page range, give or take. But a lot of people do books as sort of edited compilations. I only know one other librarian who I work with now who's written a book like this, where it's kind of their primary authors and they've come up with all the content themselves, because it's horrible. I mean, it's a lot of work. I'm sure we'll talk about this, but I mean, this was 2 years of my life that I didn't necessarily know I was going to commit. But so I don't think it's something that's totally uncommon, but there are a lot of ways to do it. And I think if you take this path, it's because you really wanted to, or else you got snookered into it like I did. But yeah, most people fully can get away with not do this and still have very productive and successful librarian careers. Although academics, it's very common to write a book more like this when you're, say, a faculty member.
Sure. So Ryan, you've got a set of kind of nice blog posts on the process of writing your book, but for the benefit of people who haven't seen it, and maybe you should share your website URL as well, but sort of how did you get kicked off into authorship?
Oh yeah, so the background is I have written 3 of 4 posts that I plan on writing of the process of writing a technical book, because I wasn't that well versed in what happens along the way. And I guess you could do a little type in later, but it's loose, LOOSE -bits.com is where my blog has kind of the nitty-gritty rundown. But basically for me is that I've been writing web applications for a while, and even as recently as 5 years ago, we're seeing a shift where more and more happens in your browser on your computer and not on like a server, as is typically was the case. And testing that even as recently as 5 years ago was really, really hard and bad and awful. And I remember working in a startup where one of our key demos just died because of a very easy to find bug if we had only been able to just test it. And then kind of fast forward later, the testing technologies and the ecosystem is just amazing now for what we can do. And so I started writing some blog posts on kind of the advances in testing about the time that who would become my publisher approached me and wanted to write a book on the subject of testing using, at that point, a modern front-end heavy framework. And so it coincided timing-wise pretty well for me, and I was really interested in the subject, just given how hard it had been before. And then that's what kind of led me down the road to sign on and agree to do a book.
So was it more that, like, it seems like compared to 15 years ago, like it's uncommon for people to maybe write software books as much? Was it the publisher approaching you that said, hey, this should be a book, rather than series of blog posts or tutorials or things like that? Or
so I guess in my publisher's case, which their name is Packt, spelled P-A-C-K-T, I had actually heard of them before. One of my good friends back when I lived in Washington, D.C., had written a book on a search technology, and he had published with Packt. And Packt, I had already known by reputation, tries to get books out there at the forefront first, doing niche things. So whereas other tech publishers that people might be familiar with, such as O'Reilly, which will write the Bible or something in a nutshell that defines a technology or a framework, Packt is kind of like, we're going to get out there fast with something niche and kind of go for it. And so with that in mind, that's I think why they approached me. And in a sense, it was kind of fun. I enjoy writing, and I don't write as much in my day-to-day as a software engineer. And so to be able to kind of sit down, put this together. And for me, I thought it was something that would be just kind of useful to have a step-by-step guide of some of the things that I'd now done a couple of times, of piecing everything together so that you could do what seemed like a simple thing of test all of your code that's just in a browser in a way that's not too tortured.
Cool. All right. So I guess once you guys got your book started, or not started, but rather decided to write a book, how did you sort of learn what it is that you do when writing a book? Like, did you model yourself after something else? Or I guess we could start with you, Ryan, this time, since we started with Adam last. But
okay. Well, I guess my answer is I kind of cheated. So like I said, one of my friends, Eric, had written a book for Packt. So I actually kind of grilled him of what was the process up front of like the contract, and then going to agreeing on an outline and then going to the chapters through and through. So I had a high level of what it was, and I'm sure we'll walk through kind of what that was. But what I would say is that's kind of like somebody telling you what it's going to be like to drive a car or whatnot. When you actually then get down and gear in and start doing this, it means a whole lot different. And so I'd say for most of it, I had an idea of what the timeline was set at and what was supposed to happen. But actually doing it is where I kind of learned how everything happened.
Sure.
So funny. I'm already been amused so far that you both did like how much you loved writing in college, and I'm like, really? I was an English major, and I'm like, oh, you did all this research?
Maybe because we had to do it
Yeah,
so
you didn't
rarely.
I was gonna say
Yeah.
it was like a novelty.
That's all I did. I was like, man. I would say what's funny, I had all these opportunities, I think, to probably should have thought it through, like, wow, we have this contract. So I remember distinctly, like, the moment I got this email back from the publisher that said, like, your full proposal has been accepted and you can start writing the book. And we had come up with an outline that was part of the full proposal, was to, say what we were going to cover and the audience and kind of market for it. So there's some of that process that's forced you to think up front. But I think the first thing we did was like nothing. It was like to sit there and kind of go like, oh my gosh. I actually had to sit down when I read that it had happened, because I remember thinking like, it's kind of like figuring out that, you had some like really great disease. It's kind of really interesting. You're like, oh my gosh, I've got it. Like, but now what?
So you were present with your co-author at that time?
No, I was totally by myself doing my normal job. By that point, I'd also, and this is another complication, I'd moved to a new job. So whereas before it was kind of, you have that fuel of someone else who you're talking about this subject with all the time, I totally changed jobs. So I was in this coasts, all these things. And so I had just seen Ryan finish his book actually, and had seen like what he'll describe as, like I said, it was like a disease.
Wow.
He,
and you still signed up for it.
Well, it was too late then. I didn't think, you're kind of hoping they're going to say no. Anyway, it's exciting. But so I think the first thing I did was totally procrastinate. And actually one thing, and this is something that I think we'll probably also talk about, how you get the contract in the first place. I think at the moment I realized we were going to write this book, I suddenly had this urge to like beef up other things that were related to the book but weren't the book. So I was kind of working on other articles, and I'm like, oh boy, I should really maybe start by finishing that other article and this other article. And so that kind of fed sort of this soft thinking like in the background that led to a point where I was able to start writing. But I mean, to be totally truthful, the first thing I did was kind of like be in denial for a long time and not take any particular steps and complain to Ryan about it, I think, in a very nice, like happy, confused way.
I remember for me, they had given me some examples of other books that they had published so I could get a feel for their structure and conventions, because pretty much all of my books, except one, have been part of a series, so they have certain things to follow. I remember going through the crazy word templates where you have to mark these things with different styles and just kind of format it a certain strange way. But I don't know. I remember starting with an outline, estimating it would be 300 to 400 pages and thinking, like, how am I ever going to write that much? But that's what they want. Of course, I told you earlier, it ended up being 1,600 pages for that first one. And also my original outline, I think I said it would be like 32 chapters. I had to cut down to 28 chapters even to hit only 1,600 pages. But wow. I don't know. I just remember just diving right in it, and just the realization of how much longer it takes. Even when you think you know exactly what you're going to say, it just takes so long to actually write it and move things around and edit it and get it to a point where you're happy with it.
Cool. So I guess all of you guys, had a legitimate publisher and things, and you weren't. It's not like Amazon self-published or anything. So when you're going through that process and you decided you want to write a book, who are all these people? There's a publisher, which is an entity, right? And then I assume there's someone, an editor, or what are the sort of people you need to help you put it together? Or, there's a job, which is writing the book, and then there must be a number of other people who...
There's multiple editors.
And I'd be interested to hear your experiences. In my case, so my publisher, Sam's, part of Pearson, there's kind of the initial, I think, acquisitions editor that kind of has the conversation with you, and you kind of work with them through the initial getting the contract signed and the overall pace of things. There are several editors. One looks at the overall structure of the book and makes comments like, I think this chapter's a little too long, or this one's too short, or why don't you call this something different? There's then an editor who looks at grammar and spelling mistakes and things like that. And then there's a technical editor that, for a technical book, that looks for mistakes and tries out all your code and things like that. And then there are several people involved in the final layout of the book in PDF form. There's an indexer who puts these special tags all throughout your documents. So even as the page count changes and the layout changes, they can regenerate the index at the end at any time. And then, of course, there's marketing and salespeople and all those that you don't really interact with as much.
Mine was a little different, but again, it's partially because mine is not a technical book, but also I'm learning more as I talk to the two of you and nobody else who I don't talk to. But, every publisher is so different with what they provide and kind of their structure. So we had, we submitted our proposal. We had our contact person who ended up being our primary, voice into the publisher. ACRL was ours and for the entire time. So we had this relationship with her. Her name's Catherine. And so, our first email was from her. Every other thing was from her. But she would talk to people. We had to have this proposal be vetted by this kind of expert panel to really say that this was worth investing in terms of time. And I don't know the identities of those people, but, there are other academic librarians and directors. So there's those folks in the background. But after we passed that hurdle, it was pretty much nobody. It was just me and my co-author. And like I said, for us, it was kind of we'll see you in a year and we'll email you once every 7 months maybe and say how's the book? And you're like, it's fine. And then they go away. That said, at some point you realize that there were editors. They had contractors come in and actually, when we had the drafts finished, read it through, and they really, gave us a lot of great advice in terms of edits and grammar and other little consistency marks, and also style to sound colloquial. We also had to identify reviewers, people who could understand our topic and who would then read the draft at some point and sort of help us vet it. But that wasn't through the publisher. That was kind of a requirement of the publisher.
I see.
But it's a different world with libraries. So that was actually better than having someone with no expertise or expertise that was a little different come in and try and figure that out.
So did you not send them chapters along the way?
No.
I'd be worried just about losing the whole thing. Like, at least if you send them a chapter as you go,
total. I mean, I think it's I wish I knew more about like the failure rate on books with certain publishers for this reason. But it worked for whatever reason. So maybe they just gave us leeway because they forgot about us too.
Or maybe it's just low initial investment. Wait till you're finished before they actually commit to.
Yeah. And with academic books, there's a high, often if it's a requirement for, say, a faculty member to finish it, they're going to finish it, just me. But being late is also very common in my field with when you're going to get chapters done.
Sure.
And I think, Ryan will talk about his, but when he told me his timeline and I told him mine, I think we kind of looked at each other funny. But yeah.
Yeah. So I guess my editor's story is I'm guessing loosely analogous to yours. There's an acquisition editor who is largely just a recruiter, but for book authors. And Pact has a reputation for really going heavy on the cold emails to anyone who's has like a matchup, probably like a real recruiter does. So once the acquisition editor gets you to basically sign, then for me there's two main editors. One's, and I forget the exact titles, but one's effectively a substantive editor. They're like, we're going to stick to the outline. This is the vision. And then one is more the logistics editor. Are the chapters coming in on time? Do they have the code samples? Do the images actually render in the right way on the document? Is everything visible? Are the other people being coordinated? My publisher hooked me up with two technical reviewers, and so those would be effectively like third party. My publisher didn't have to pay for them editors that would review the work, and that was where most of the substantive edits came. And then once you get through that, then you switch over to the basically the proofing editors, as well as there is a technical editor who's not as good as your technical reviewers who are from in the industry, but maybe points out a thing or two. And then you go to the final round of just somebody who's focused on the layout, making sure that in the PDF things are going to render as links. And then it's funny too, because at that point you can still make edits for correctness, but it then has to kind of fit the layout, because the layout's a lot more laid out than there. And then past there, you get turned over to a marketing person who, at least in my case, was spread across many, many books they were promoting. So I'd get occasional attention, like once a month, or when there was a special related event and they were pushing similar books.
You mentioned a proofing editor. Does that mean somebody who's just looking for like grammar and spelling, or is that?
Yeah, well, there's two things. There is, you've got early on, when you're just in the what's considered the rough draft stage, your technical reviewers, who are not editors, these are two people from the community who are very big into testing with JavaScript. They kind of just tear your chapters apart, and that's you're discussing everything then. For what Pact provided after I'd submitted what I think they were called pre-final. There were so many versions of the word final that weren't actually final. I was waiting for final. That's when they have one or two people who are pure proofing editors, and I forgot we did have an index or two. And then you have someone who is kind of technical, but is doing technical across a number of books, probably specializing in a generic area. But by and large, for Pact, their proofers weren't the best. They caught a number of things, but I'd say 1 out of every 5 was something I'd reject. And they didn't catch that much. I really, because they had been in the past known for letting through some trying to get to market so fast, letting through some egregious books with quality issues. So I kind of took it on myself to proof the heck out of it, which is why when Robin talks about proofing, I was quite jealous learning of her awesome editors for proofing and such.
I wish you could keep them with you your whole life. They were like, you sound very stiff here, so I've reworded all of your sentences. Like, here are 1,000 edits for you to accept that'll just make you sound amazing. And I thought, wow, this is great.
Yeah, I think it's really tough for a technical book. I've definitely had experiences where they are definitely trying to be helpful and rewording things, but actually for a technical book makes it incorrect because, it doesn't sound like English to begin with. And it's a tough job. I mean, I don't know how they can sit there and read through all these books without understanding what they're talking about and still provide meaningful feedback. But it's kind of hit or miss, I think. Sometimes it ends up being more trouble than it's worth, I think.
Yeah.
So I think you guys mentioned you had to provide your own technical reviewers. Now, are they compensated for that? Or are they just like people who are out of the goodness of their heart care about Backbone testing? Or
I didn't actually provide my own technical reviewers. I'm assuming it's the same acquisition editor who acquired me, acquired 2 folks from the community.
Okay.
And one of my reviewers was, I'd known him by name, and he was a good, solid reviewer. He was kind of more of the cheerleader. My other reviewer I knew was a testing guru, and he was just fantastic. He would just shred the chapters, and it's like they would give the reviewers an opportunity to rank 0 through 10. The one who was the kind of like the more kind of optimistic one would give me like an 8 or something, and the other reviewer, who actually helped the quality of the book immensely and probably more, would give me like a 4 and say, this is horrible.
Well, better to hear it then than later.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
But so I didn't have to provide my own.
I'm so glad I didn't have that. The rankings sound terrible.
For me, the main technical editor would get compensated by the publisher, and almost always I would get to choose the person. Sometimes I'd let the publisher decide. But often I would ask extra people if they could review bits and pieces out of the goodness of their heart.
Okay, cool. All right, maybe we'll go with Robin first this time, since we've been going back and forth. But I guess getting back to kind of the more like your question, as we've been doing previously, what do you write in Word? What do you use LaTeX, or like how do you draw diagrams in your books?
No, not for mine. I don't think. So I had a complication, and again, a positive complication, which is, again, I had a co-author, and we lived in different states and time zones. And we collaborated a number of times before, so we kind of knew how we, write, and we kind of ended up dividing it so that one person would rule a chapter, the other person would assist with it, and then for other chapters it'd be switched. So we ended up, we tried a bunch of things. We tried Dropbox with Word documents, but I tend to create a whole bunch of versions of drafts. So then I would like create a chapter called like Chapter 1 Fake, or like Chapter 1 Terrible. And, so we ended up going with Google Drive, which worked really well for us. Just both in terms of, we ended up meeting probably twice a month to go over what we had produced and some other details of, what had happened since we had last worked on the book, and being able to review at the same time and leave comments. It was just a really robust system for us. So that's how we wrote the whole book in the end, was pretty much in Google Drive and using Docs. And we've done that now several times with other co-authored articles. It's worked great.
Did your publisher have any sort of requirements on that, or they were just able to work with it?
Yeah, well, eventually we submitted it. I think in the end we had to put everything into Word docs, which we submitted via a shared Dropbox folder. That was how they preferred to do it. So, and I've had different editors since then on kind of projects that weren't necessarily full books, but had a version of that. But because we didn't have check-ins the same way, I think, that Adam and Ryan did, it was easy enough to kind of just turn over all of the chapter documents plus all of the images at the same time. And it's so much information, you kind of have to find a big way to dump it. So it was really, I thought there's a couple technologies. I've talked to other folks in my background field, which was originally English literature, when they wrote really beautiful full-length books, and they've used tools like Scrivener, I think one is called, which has a system where you can translate like an outline and notes into a full document structure, and then create this beautiful published or pre-published work that looks ideal. And in the end, because we did have someone who helped create a layout for the entire book, all we needed to send them was text, and then, placeholders for where the images were to go. And then we let their imagination take it from there. So it was simple, except for all the writing, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, we use Word, and I kind of mentioned earlier, they have you mark things with these crazy styles for code versus text versus sidebars and other things. And and just odd conventions, and it looks weird on the screen, but they have software that then translates that to PDF files and in their final process. Yeah, I would just kind of email them Word docs. And you asked about like diagrams. Everything was just separate image files that you'd reference. Actually, I think one of my favorite things was I could draw a random picture and then someone would professionally redraw it.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
So that's a lot of fun, just being able to do diagrams that way.
So for me is Pact has templates for Word with all of the styles, or an open office, open format with an analogous thing. I chose Microsoft Word. I actually kept my docs in a private repository and checked in my Word documents, which means I couldn't actually diff them, use the tools programmers use to see line by line differences of what's changing. But it was a way for me to checkpoint snapshot, because I was more worried about a Microsoft Word document corruption, that I could go back in time and get an uncorrupt copy. Then there were all of the code samples, and this is largely a code sample based book, and it's a book about testing and about automation. So I spoke with the publisher early and got permission to have all of the code samples of the book actually be an open source code repository. And what was nice is, as writing a testing book, your code should pass the tests, or else that would look bad. I was able to have that open source code repository be actually automated testing wise, so that I know all of the samples in here actually work, because they are live living code that as the last step I would kind of paste in. If I were to do it again, though, I've talked with another more modern author who's written a book more recently as Pact. There's a tool called ASCII Doc, which is going to do a kind of markdown quasi-LaTeX type format. So you stay in text the whole time, and it will output to one of the blessed formats in OpenOffice, so that you can keep it all in text and not have to worry about sizing and all of those other things. Or like
smart quotes.
Well, and especially when the styles, you have two different styles that are meaningfully different, but that look the same to you. And it's only when they'll like club it and put it out in that final format that you could see the difference. So
cool. Actually, you mentioned you spoke with your publisher kind of beforehand about putting out the code samples as you went. Did you guys go through any sort of negotiation, or was it like just you took whatever the publisher said it was going to be in terms of ownership of the series title, or the your next books, or the revenue split, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I negotiated. I mean, biases be told.
He's a former lawyer.
I'm a former attorney on my second career. Pact, their boilerplate contract, I didn't negotiate royalties or any of the financial side of it. I more or less did this, I think, for similar reasons to Adam. But there was one provision that said they would have rights to whatever my second book would be, whatever it is. And I'm just like, I'm totally worried and scared about my first one. I don't even want to have to consider my second one, should that day ever come, being already encumbered.
It's like your first child kind of thing. It's like, I own it now. Sorry, continue.
And then there were the code samples. I negotiated to have an open source license. And then I think there were some other weird provisions. And what basically, they need authors to write these books, at least for the scenario I was coming into here, because I didn't approach them first. There were a couple of other nitpicky details, and pretty much everything I pushed on, they just caved immediately. My intuition for at least the situation I was going into, they wanted to sign that and get a commitment for a book. So I would say, depending on what's going on, have a sit down and really consider what you want in your contract, because for me, it was just asking, and especially things that didn't make sense to my goals, because it's all up for grabs.
Oh, that's interesting, because my sort of assumption is, dealing with a large company, they just don't care about you, and they're like, if you say I want it different, they'll be like, screw you, I'll find somebody else who will do it. But
I would say, I'll just throw in one last thing, is that and this goes to a higher level thing, at least for technical books like this, and what you were mentioning earlier about how many books don't finish, is there's this weird balance of powers. They need people to write these books, and with the advance they give you, It's comparatively, as a software engineer and the amount of hours I put in, it's not going to be lucrative enough to force me to write this. They need you to get started, get invested in the book in the hope that it actually goes along so that it'll actually go through. And so generally speaking, other than you've signed a contract with, you've signed away many, many things because they have very experienced attorneys doing this professionally for a living. They need to entice you to get there and will pretty much do, well, I guess it depends. I'm thinking just technical. They pretty much do anything to get you to sign on and agree.
So I love that you use words like advance. Just like for the technical world, I'm like, oh, for the library world, it's $0. So that sounds, if they bought me a lunch, that would have been kind of nice. I'll just say we actually negotiated our contract for reasons beyond just being savvy people who probably should have done that anyway, like many contracts. So when we proposed our book, which it's kind of funny looking back. At the time, I look at my CV as it stood when I signed on, and I'm like, I don't know how they, now I think it looks pretty good because it's done a lot of things. But at the time, I think my co-author Rachel and I both felt that we wanted to show that even our kind of passion for the topic had gotten us into the Altmetrics community, which again, topic of the book, and it's a very active community. So one thing we said in our proposal was that we were going to try and get our foreword written by the two most preeminent people in the field who did agree to do our foreword. And that's another story too. And two more people who I think for people you need for writing a book, they were great. But my topic is very close to scholarly communication, and there's a lot of passion in the library world about open access. So what these two really preeminent people said was, we will work with you, we're happy to do it, but we really we value open access. And so that's something we want in the contract. So we were actually able, and our publisher was so great about this, to negotiate that our entire book becomes open access in the e-copy in 6 months. We didn't have a date at the time, but we've negotiated that.
For the benefit of people who maybe don't know what open access is.
Oh, yes. Sorry. So it's a different publishing sort of philosophy and sort of method than one where you imagine, again, I'm an author who wrote this essentially for free as a book. At some point, I do know someone else who wrote for this publisher who his book was so successful on a technology called Zotero that he was able to buy like a couch that came in, after the publisher recouped cost. This is a non-profit publisher. And so it's not really about money. Open access kind of says that what if publishing doesn't have to be so expensive? What if there's a point, and ideally it's at the very beginning, where the people who read your book don't pay anything, and the costs for publishing a book are either absorbed because of the people who want to do it, or else the authors actually work. And it's a little different because a lot of it comes more from the journal industry rather than the book industry. But there are a lot of people who you could say, what if I didn't ever have a print copy of this book? I just wrote it and put it online. If that was what we were out to do, then it really could be free. And clearly putting it in print can be pricey. People have to invest in it. The publisher wants to not go broke, basically. So we are right now, the book as it's come out in print and the e-copy both have a cost to it. But for reasons of impact, which is really great because that's kind of what the book is about, things that are free, people are more likely to run into them and read them. And that's kind of what a lot of academic writing is more about, is to get this information out into the world. I could go on about that. It's a whole other stuff you need for thing. But so that was something that I think my co-author and I were really nervous about. We're like, so we can get these great people, but they kind of want it to be for free at some point. And publishers are also very experienced for these type of requests. So even if they say no, they've probably heard it before. And that's something I didn't think about till after the fact. And so they'd had this kind of request before and were really accommodating. And it wasn't a problem. But I don't think I would have asked unless we had the two really, maybe they wouldn't have said yes unless we had these two like really big names relative to the subject say yes under those conditions.
for me, negotiating, maybe I could have used Ryan's services. There was just one book where I was really passionate about structuring it a certain way, naming it a certain thing. I even wanted to design the cover. And so they let me do that for that one book that wasn't a part of any series. And then for the second book I did, we came to an agreement to do it in color. And it was kind of the first, as far as I know, it was the first like mainstream technical book to be in color like that, like the code and, Visual Studio syntax coloring and the XML colored. And it made such a huge difference in the readability of the code, not just, the pictures as well, that they decided to start doing that for a lot more books. And every book I've done since then, we've done in color. And it was a negotiation originally because it's obviously more expensive for them to print it that way. But I think they saw that the results kind of paid for it.
Cool. And actually, I think my next question, I'll start with Adam because I've seen your work habits before. But I was kind of wondering what the actual process of, like putting words on pages, like, are you sitting in front of the TV? Do you do it late at night after your kids go to bed or?
Yes. For me, a lot of it late at night and on weekends and in front of the TV. Although I think it depends what type of writing I'm doing. If I'm revising or if I'm kind of doing more research or writing code, I can manage with the TV a lot more so than if I'm doing like hardcore, like writing paragraphs for the first time. Then the TV's a little distracting. But yeah, it's kind of get comfy, plan to be up late. And I think for me, maybe for most people, having long blocks of time is very important because it's kind of hard to get going, I think. And so you just kind of need to carve out a long block of time and get in the zone.
Yeah, it's not me, but I knew someone who once told me that it was like an MFA person that they would just go sit in their closet like for hours and just write. And that's how they wrote. Like that was, I think, fiction. But
yeah. I've seen Adam walk around with like a little platform on his chest and a laptop typing as he wanders around.
We were going to try to patent that and sell them. That never happened though.
I totally relate to the long blocks of time. I kind of need to suffer, I think, for writing ever since I've ever had to write anything that was like over
it's 5 English
pages.
Major tendencies coming out.
Yeah, it's led to the only addiction that I'll admit to on camera, which is like I chew gum obsessively. I like chain chew gum, and that's part of my writing process. That's from college, but I find that I need to like be in a room and tell myself like, you're not leaving this room. This is your job, is to stay in this room and write this. And and I'll do the thing, which is very, I think of like American Beauty and the mantra of the woman who is like trying to sell a house. Like, I'm going to sell this house today. I'll be like, I'm going to write 10 pages today, like 10 good pages. And then you're like, okay, not 10, but 5 really good pages. And I wish you could say like the time translates really well into what comes out. And what I find, at least some people, it really does. They have like, I think you get on a schedule. And there was a point in time where my work is I love the fact that they support their librarians who want to go into the publishing route or other sorts of intensive research projects with what's called a time grant.
Oh.
So I applied for time off basically from work in order to accomplish something that would in the end benefit my workplace, UW Libraries. And so I took, I can't remember exactly, I think it was like the equivalent of 3 weeks off from work to finish the last push in editing and like proofing of the book. And so then I almost got to the point where I knew about how much work I would get done. But some days, you'd sit down for like 3 hours and you would get basically nothing done. I'd like work on research instead of actually writing the book because I couldn't find inspiration. And sometimes I had like an hour and I could push out really good stuff because I had been thinking about it. So, I also, if you know IKEA's Poang chair, I think it's called. It's like a 2-piece chair where there's like a little footstool. It's a cheap chair. It's everywhere. Just go to any garage sale, you'll find one. And the bottom part, the footstool, I would sit on the ground, like on a carpeted floor, and I'd put my computer on the Poang footstool, and I'd use it like a prison, like on my little personal prison. So I couldn't get up from it except to like use the restroom.
So almost like being in the closet, but not.
Yeah, but
right.
there was like a light and I technically could leave, but that was like my process.
Right.
And it
We'll
was
have to
very
put up
painful.
a link for that then.
Yeah, just Google
See if we get an
Prolong.
IKEA referral.
Oh, do they have
Prolonged chair.
referrals?
Maybe I will make money off this book.
There we go. Yeah, especially you can get IKEA furniture, so even beyond a couch.
It's a cool $20 right there.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, so for me, my experience, I'm guessing roughly mirrors Adam's, just much shorter because my book's shorter. I would do usually 11 p.m. or later, or really early in the morning. And what I can say is that it's basically, at least for me, is a lot of the writing was just done tired, and so I can actually pretty much sit down and churn. But I'm fairly well aware of, like, I'm not at my best right now, and so then I would try and focus more on
It's like your
logistics.
college paper. You can write way faster after
it's
3
true.
a.m.
Yeah.
Once your brain stops telling you this is terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just give in to the mediocrity. So I would try and focus on, like, I'm going to go proof now because I am not in shape to do new content. Or if I finally am like really amped up on coffee, is like, okay, tonight we're doing that. But it was doing actual writing, but it was the large chunks, usually when nothing else is going on, that for me were kind of the key thing to powering through.
When you made me think of this, I'm kind of, when you're talking about telling yourself I'm going to write 10 pages today, it gets to a point, at least for me, schedule wise, where it's like, okay, well, every week I have to finish another chapter. There's just no other way to it. And each chapter is a Word doc, but I would also have like a second Word doc for each chapter. That's like all the stuff that's not ready yet for that. And, or also if I'm randomly working on one and I have an idea for another, I have a place to like put my idea. But sometimes it would get to the point where, okay, well, I have to turn this in as is. And this extra stuff I still wanted to do, I'm just going to save for round 2 because it's kind of playing games with the schedule because they're often 2 or 3 rounds. So, you just kind of force yourself to get to some finished point, knowing that you still have more chances.
I think it's really healthy. Like, even though my publisher didn't ask for drafts, I had to meet this, every 2 weeks with my co-author, and they'd be like, well, let's look over chapter so-and-so. And you're like, oh, poop. Like, got to finish chapters, and and I think that's it's a hard thing, but it's a really good thing because at some point you have to give up on some of that stuff, at least for, it depends unless you're like Flaubert and then you can spend however long writing Madame Bovary. But other than that, you have to I think it's really good, especially if you're in a type of something where you can think about the next project. And I didn't even think about it until you said so, but I worked on a kind of like a 60, no, I think it was less, like a, over 20, less than 50-page version of similar content to the book afterwards with the same publisher for a different kind of publishing series. And it was so much easier to do, in part because there were updates that I couldn't make into the book or didn't quite fit, and I was able to just like throw them in, and I was really ready processing wise.
So like, how did you, so I think you guys are kind of alluding to the fact that you had to stay on schedule, but like, how did you even know whether you were on schedule, or like, how did you keep track and like enforce that?
Well, for me, it was in the contract. So, and my schedule was aggressive beyond any, like...
Oh, yours was crazy.
Beyond any,
what was your, like, start to end? How many months was it?
Start to end was first chapter due first week of January with, I think, a 2-week ramp-up time, which was one of the longest times. It was going to be... I forget how many chapters. I think it was 6 chapters total plus an appendix. Last of the substantive work done by, I think, February 19th.
I think
Wait, January?
A month and a half?
Okay, I was assuming like the fast was like 6 months.
Like I said, extremely aggressive. And
wow.
What happened is that the short answer is that it goes back to enticing authors to actually finish books, because again, my sense is a lot of these books don't get finished. Once you're about halfway through and they see that you've put down chapters, the power balance really shifts, because they're not going to throw gobs of money at you. You've shown that you've got something there that they could potentially turn into a book. By contract rights, they could take you out and put in another author, but they're not going to find somebody to do that. Sure. And that's when you can kind of expand it. And for me, like other stuff happened, but it was essentially I just said, no, I'm going to take more time, and I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a tight schedule. My first book, I was supposed to have it done in a year, and I basically took 2 years. And it kind of worked out because for the timing of the technology was late as well. I give myself incentives for kind of finishing on time, and I track it in any number of ways. Sometimes I'll have something like up on the mirror and like have something satisfying where like if there's a Post-it note for each chapter and I can remove a Post-it note when I'm done with one, just, anything to kind of provide extra motivation.
Yeah, I mean, I probably shouldn't even say this, but it's so true. I don't think I really believed I was going to finish the book until it had been like 6 months in. And I was like perfectly thinking like, well, if this doesn't work out, then I'm probably in good company with lots of other, like I was kind of identifying more with the, because I think we were so behind schedule. We were immediately behind schedule in part because we didn't know what we were doing, or we didn't know how to really approach some things that required this sort of getting over a hump. And for us, actually, it's so funny you mentioned that with your first book, because with us, a lot of books are written on, either topics where they're really solid and you have to find the new thing, and that takes a lot of time to figure out what's new, or you write it about something which is very new and then you have a lot you need to cover, but it could change on you. And my book, the topic was one where it also has many technologies involved in it, and there'd be things like a huge acquisition, and so that tool is not that tool anymore. Or by the way, when you said there were only 3 options for something, they just came up with 2 more options, and you're like, I just finished that chapter, I need to like write it again. So I think it was sort of like we hit a point with our outline where we had finished all the chapters that were background or that were like very solid and dependable in terms of like the history of some of these topics, and we hit the new part, which we had saved till last. It was like our 5th chapter, which we have more than 5 chapters, but we knew that's the one that was the least stable. And then when we started on that was when we like knew we had to get this done ASAP, because at any second, like, and I totally mean it. Like we've had, there's a tool called Impact Story, and it used to be called Total Impact. And like the URL changed, everything changed. That was before we wrote the book. We were writing an article, but it was like the day we had submitted the article, everything changed. And we were like, thank goodness it hasn't gone to print. And we emailed the editor of that publication. We're like, can you change every instance where it says this to that? And then add this one line that says like changed as of today. And so I feel like there's also sometimes where you just know, like if it doesn't happen now, that's it. But we didn't have really good time, like reasons to keep going. And then it'd be like, oh, it's Christmas or it's summer break or, it's fall and I have a lot of teaching to do. And so we probably could have used more milestones beforehand.
Cool. So I guess once you finish the book and it's sort of out in the world, what do you guys use to keep track of it? I mean, you have an academic book. Do you try to see if it's being used in any classrooms or?
I do. Yeah. Well, it's so funny you mentioned it because it's kind of like...
Or not just track it, but like market it and try to get it out there.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because the whole topic of my book is about how to make an impact or track the impact of your research. So as soon as the book was out, we're like, oh my gosh, we really need to track the impact of this book, the methods described in the book, because otherwise people are going to ask why we didn't do that. So...
it'd be a good post article or
post,
like
like expose about like really fake librarian types. But so I think one thing that's really smart, and I think sounds like people at this table did, is it's good to know how your book's being marketed and to think about like where can you find that, or where is that really going? So there was the publisher is associated with one of the major American Library Association for Academic Libraries. So they send out an email blast right away to everyone. And so it was like thinking about, okay, so who is this going out to? How many people? I got a lot of emails from colleagues and people I didn't know who obviously had seen it. So I tried to keep those. The major thing I do, and I recommend for any author who's interested in seeing how their book is doing. And I checked Ryan's, and I would have checked Adam's, except that I didn't know the title till right now. All of them. I checked all of them. There's a site called worldcat.org. It's a library resource, so don't worry if you don't know about it, but it's a place where you can see consolidated catalogs of certain libraries from around the world. So if you want to know, for example, for an academic book, who's bought your book, you could ask the publisher, but mostly it's going to be libraries and academic institutions that have bought it. And so you can do a search on your book and see what libraries carry it, how many, and at what rate they're acquiring it. So I think right now there are about 60 libraries that own my book, and it just came out like the beginning of this month. I think I looked at Ryan's and it had like 250 libraries have it. But that's a nice metric just to see, like, not only is it going out there, but, think about students in a program who might want to read your book. Are they going to find it? We tracked on Twitter. We looked at social media to see. We both announced it. My co-author and I, our publisher, announced it. We tracked who else was talking about it, all those sorts of routes. And then we're looking for reviews. That's very common to, both on Amazon, Goodreads, but also formal review publications that might say something about your book. Ours doesn't have one yet, but I actually reviewed a book from the same publisher that came out around the same time, so I'm expecting it any day now, good or bad. But I think it's really fun to do too, because you spend so much time first worrying if it's going to get done, at least I did, and then it occurs to you kind of after it's out there, like, oh my gosh, are people going to like it? Or what are people going to think? And looking for keeping your ears open to that reaction through various channels, that's, I think, really important for future plans and other things. But that's what I've done so far. But like I said, mine's been less than a month, so a lot of places it'll show up haven't manifested yet.
Sure. Yeah, I haven't done much. Most of the sales for mine are through Amazon, and Amazon actually has good stats that they can show you, even break it down by geographic area and things like that. The publisher gives monthly reports that are like 3 months delayed. And so you can see also that some of the times they'll translate it into other languages. And so you can kind of get that report from the publisher on what languages they got translated into and when. Other than that, I would sometimes pop in a Barnes & Noble or Borders when they existed and get to see like 1 or 2 copies like hidden on the shelf somewhere. And
you shuffle it to the front.
That's right. I find a much better place, not the side view, much more prominent placement that it deserves. But yeah, that's pretty much all I do.
And so, I don't have that much to add here. Is Amazon has their ranking and their sales tracking tool and a nice little map on top of that. I'd never heard of WorldCat, but fortunately, Robin showed me that, and that was actually really interesting and kind of cool to see. In terms of other marketing, my publisher's marketing person did do kind of some pushes out there, and what they really wanted from the beginning was to get positive reviews on Amazon, because apparently for them that's the thing that drives this most. So I'm hooked into the local Seattle area JavaScript meetups. My business partner runs one of them, and I host the other one. And we basically, the publisher made a deal for free copies of the book in exchange for a review.
Neutral, any review they
right.
As opposed to like to give me a 5-star review.
Well, and
whoops, I laughed so hard.
And so I did get the reviews, and the reviews all disclaimed that they were given free copies. What was nice when actually on Amazon got first reviews from people I'd never heard of and that did not actually give copies to. And I would say that getting Amazon reviews was probably as far as I can tell, the biggest thing that has impact. There's periodic, like, publisher will rotate through themes of topics to do discounts and big pushes and an email blast, but my sense is those don't matter quite so much as just, people put so much stock in Amazon specifically, and probably to some extent Goodreads as well, for being the recommendation where to go for a subject.
Cool. I guess almost done, but I'm curious at least about, like, what are the mechanics of getting paid? Like, do you get a check every year? I know my mom was a college professor and wrote a book, and she'd get like $500 once a year or something like that, depending on how many classes used her book. But have you gotten paid?
Yes.
I mean, I assume that the add-on at this point, it's been long enough.
When you've done enough, it tends to add up.
After your third book.
So I get a monthly check, and it can vary greatly. Other than that, it's just every time I write a new one.
And it's some percentage of the sales, or
yes,
I guess probably the net or something.
It's
some
a
fake net.
It's a small percentage of the sale.
Okay.
Because when you consider the retail price, I mean, the technical books are expensive. I don't know, like mine tend to be like $60, sometimes 70, but that's the retail price. And so when you consider then the price that the Amazon bought it for, and then the royalty is a small percentage of that, it's...
Yeah, I saw on Amazon you could even rent your book. I assume you get nothing when someone rents your book.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I hadn't either. I did that on your book. It said, rent this book for $20.
Must mean yours could be a textbook for classes, which is great.
So I think some of them they've used. It's pretty specific, I think, for a textbook, but...
Sure. And I guess yours is a nonprofit publisher, so does that mean you get no money at all?
No, it means you can get money, but I wouldn't go into it expecting it. Actually, what's funny is it's actually led to me getting paid for other things, which I thought was great. But so if you work with an academic publisher, or maybe other types too, it's kind of, if your book is one of those that makes it over the hump where it's made back sufficient money to the publisher, then you'll get paid. But it's something where because the reason I wrote it were not financial, and they were so primarily based on both passion for the topic and career goals. Obviously, by making it open access at a certain point, I imagine that would cut into what otherwise would have been money sales, and that's fine with me. But I wasn't kidding about that couch example. That's kind of what you can best expect from this sort of thing. But the other work I referenced with the same publisher, the shorter version I wrote, that's that one we were offered a flat amount to write the shorter version that was kind of more for a specific professional audience. And that was great. So overall, between the two projects, that's more money than I expected to make. I could definitely, buy myself like couple breakfasts with it.
Nice.
So yeah, but I don't know how you get paid otherwise, and Ryan won't tell me how much he makes from the book.
I'm working up to the couch. The couch, the Poang chair that I'm going to get off Craigslist. So my publisher does quarterly, and at least mine has a breakdown, because there is actually, I guess, a rental-ish component. Some of it are for paper. They'll do a breakdown of the paper is the most expensive, so it's a straight percentage. That's where you get the most money. Then the e-publication. And then they have some notion of, I guess they just track use of, you can subscribe to all of their books online.
Right.
And I don't know how they apportion it. And since there is a number there, I'm trusting their judgment, because I wouldn't otherwise know.
Sure.
And there's some portion for that in the kind of the breakdown, and that's the smallest because somebody's paying a monthly fee for not just your book, but a whole bunch of others.
Sure. What'd you guys do to celebrate? You're all done, right? You're all finished. Well, you're done. But
yeah, I'm in the middle of one right now, so there's never time
to start a new book as your celebration.
Yeah.
Super fun. That's really great.
I don't know. I don't even remember what I used to do to celebrate. Probably go out for a nice dinner when you're done, I think, is the thing. What did you do?
It's so weird because, again, like you kind of always, you think you could tell when you're done, but sometimes you
yeah,
really
sure. When
can't.
did you celebrate? When you got a copy of your book?
Yeah, I think when I got sent like 5 copies of the book.
Right, yeah.
And then like you hear it's in print, but no one's ever seen it, and you've never seen it. And you're like, I'm not really sure like what's going to... So I got my 5 copies, and my co-author got hers. And so we're going to meet up in San Francisco. But before then, when we submitted everything and we knew we were done like writing chapters, I also met up with her at a conference, and I think we just went to our favorite happy hour place, and that was the extent of it. But I don't know if you guys agree. I feel like it really is like you're not really ever done, because once you finish writing the book, people are just going to start reading it. So then all of a sudden you get questions about it, and people like who you don't know very well are like, did you write a book or something? And you're like, yeah, that's why I didn't come to all your barbecues. And like, or yeah, that's what I've been doing. So I certainly feel like now suddenly, like, I'm doing a webinar next week with another group that wants to hear about the topic, and there are people who now want to hear more about what this is about. And so what normally would be like a fallow period is now where I have to do more work, just not writing work, hopefully.
A fallow period sounds interesting.
It'd be nice not to have like a year of like doing nothing, but
did you put a headdress on and
plowed a field and just
like fallow.
Pharaoh, which is what is that?
That's an Egyptian.
Oh, like PH. I was thinking. Never mind what I was thinking. No, I meant the one where you don't do stuff. Like don't sow grain.
Sorry, I was just being mean.
Get myself a dictionary with my money someday.
Yeah, I'd actually echo that sentiment. It's more that it's not, at least for me, it's not like you're done and then this celebration because you're totally done. It's like you're done with one stage and then comes the next stage. And even when it's published and you have your copy, that was when like a lot of the marketing stuff came up, recruit reviewers and start doing stuff. I'd say the biggest thing it was kind of weird because it felt both good and bad was when the bulk of the writing was done. Suddenly I got a whole amount of time back and I wasn't quite so tired all the time. And yet at the same time, I've been doing this for long enough and so intensely, it's just kind of, it felt very weird to not be writing in all available free time.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, it feels really good because you have audio and I was like, this is what felt good. That was amazing when I was like, it's in print and like I'd never seen it and I was like, I can touch it. That's huge. That's a huge difference. 1,600 pages, you could do that for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, you could really fan yourself.
Yeah, that's great.
Nice. Cool. Well, I guess lastly, do you have any advice for people who are considering writing a book? Should they? Or why should they if they should? Yeah.
Right. I mean, they should if they are really passionate about a topic, I think, and they're kind of doing it for the right reasons. Because
which doesn't include money, or maybe includes
does
money?
not include money.
I feel like of all this, you might have gotten a little money out of it in the end, but not enough to merit what you sacrificed otherwise.
Yes,
as like if you did.
Maybe
software contracting or something.
Maybe if you're going to write a novel, we don't know anyone that's written a novel. I guess you write the next Harry Potter. Well, that's one thing, but. I don't know. I think because it's such a huge time investment, like way more than you would imagine, you just have to make sure you're going to enjoy not that I enjoy the process, but that you at least enjoy the accomplishment when you're done, I guess. Or you have some kind of good driving reason behind it, because it will take a lot longer. It will take much more effort than you would assume.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but again, I'm like in a field where you kind of have to in other ways. But I really feel like, and this is something where I can articulate it almost more clearly, reading books like this from people who've done them who aren't me. If you write something that's really useful or makes a statement as a book, technical, not technical, novel too probably, people read it and it makes a difference somehow. It has to make a big difference, but this is a book where if I was kind of starting my career now and I had read it, it would get me to understand a topic that in a way that wouldn't be easy otherwise. And so that, to me, was one of the reasons that I wrote it. I wanted people to have that feeling, and I'm really glad I did it for that reason, so I can have this conversation now with more people about what this book is talking about. You also come out, and this shouldn't be a shock, but it totally shocked me, was you come out and you may be one of these people who really, really knows a field well, which you kind of should be going into it, but you really come out and suddenly you're very comfortable talking about a certain topic that, gives you a boost so that when you run into, other opportunities to talk about it, you are extremely up to date and you have so much practice in putting your thoughts out there. And I've never been as comfortable talking about this topic as I have after finishing the book, even when I did other types of publication. And so that itself is a huge, kind of growth factor for me from writing the book. So I think if you have something that you are passionate about, like Adam said, and you want to come out really, really knowing it well and being comfortable and qualified to talk to other people about it, if you're part of the way there, then the book will, if you can get people to let you write it, then you'll come out far and away, more on that spectrum for what it's worth.
Yeah, someone has said like the best way to learn a topic is to write a book about it, or to teach someone else about it. That's definitely true. It's a great way to kind of, you're forced to learn the ins and outs of the whole thing.
Yeah, I would actually just completely echo that. Is that and it was actually a bit of a surprise for me. Is you I guess this might not be the case for your subsequent books, but for me at least, you're not picked or you don't get signed up to be a contract because you're an expert on the topic. It's because by the end of the writing the book, you will be the expert on the topic. And it's just the course of that, especially with my technical reviewers, where they'd shred something and they'd say, no, it's this way. And I'm like, there's no way it's that way. And then finally go read it and I'm like, oh, I've been wrong for like years. So I guess it's the benefits of why you would want to do this, or at least for a technical book, is you will become an expert in a subject. So as long as you have the passion about that, that's good. And then what I'd say is it's an opportunity to become more ingrained in a community. The thing that also timed out and figured in is I knew we were moving to Seattle, and it was a way for me to go out and meet the JavaScript community and get involved in a bigger way for my specific book here. And I did end up meeting my business partner who we founded our company together with. And so it's those kind of intangible benefits of being able to just, again, going with your passion, but just be a bigger part of that community with this as a vehicle to get you there. Whereas it's just one nice avenue to that.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool. All right. And I guess last up, if people want to find more about you or your books online, do you have anything you want to share? Twitter handles, websites, anything like that? You don't have to, of course, but...
Well, I do have adamnathan.net, but the site is kind of defunct at the moment. So. or Adam Nathan on Twitter.
King of Clap, does that still exist?
I don't know what you're talking about.
I will actually, well, if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Robin Librarian. That's me. It's easier to spell than my last name.
Robin?
I-N, like the bird / Batman.
Not very Swedish.
Yeah,
pop singer.
Not that one, no. You can tweet at her too if you want. It's fine. Tell her that metrics are useful. But I will just say, if you want to learn more about the topic, we're all kind of talking about the books without talking about the topics, which I find actually very refreshing. But I will just say, if you want to learn more about this book and kind of what it's about there, just Google the word Altmetrics or research impact. There's a NISO initiative going on right now to help define all those lovely words and how they could impact you as a librarian. So rather than look up this book, which you are happy to do if you are innovative and like searching, I would suggest learning more about the topic.
For mine, it's I actually did get a domain, so it's Backbone.js has all of the open source code samples and then many gratuitous links to the book. My blog is loose-bits.com, and like I said from the beginning, I did write a series of posts about the meta level experience of writing the book, and kind of so more of the nitty gritty details and fun little facts, like them going to publication and almost messing up the title.
Oh, don't even get started all the things that go wrong. Actually.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for the Stuff You Need For. You can find us online at stuffyouneedfor.com. If you can leave us a comment with questions, I'll make sure that I round trip with these guys to get you answers. Or if you have suggestions or requests for future topics, we'll entertain that as well. You can also follow us on our channel on YouTube, find us in the iTunes store, or in whatever your favorite podcast app is. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yay.